This is Gemara Yevamos Daf Sadi Dalit. All learning should bring an incredible schoshidah for Yisrael and Devara. Tamar Tziba Basbar Rachel Shalom Lebizava Oivik Ben Tali Shem Ben Chaya Blum Yehudes Savas Asima Malka. They shall find the Shalachagim Bekarov, as well as learning should be a schos for Shleim Shal Yisben Yefrei Tishmol Ben Tila. Naftali Sim Mechlas and Cham Basivas Ablum Bas Middelchaim Yishu Ben Malka Bashav Figur Shirchana and Leah Basar Adina Besoich Sha'ar Chayli Yisrael. We're holding on Sadi Dalid Amid Aleph. We're approximately 12-13 lines down. The first word of line is Hazama. We pick up today's discussion in which Amar Li Rav Mordechai Li Rav Ashi. Rav Mordechai says to Rav Ashi, and this is going to go back to the discussion whether an Eid Echad has an Amanis to allow a Yevama not to do Yibam and marry the Yavam, but to allow the Yevama to marry Chutz, to marry anyone else in the world. Does an Eid Echad, does a singular witness have that ability to allow her to marry outside? So Rav Mordechai says to Rav Ashi, V'amullah, and some say Rav Achal or Rav Ashi. So whether it's Rav Mordechai or Rav Achal, they said to Rav Ashi the following proof from the Mishnah. Toshima, Eino Yishan Amenes Leimer Meiz Yabmi. A woman is not believed. A woman is not believed to say about herself, Ma Yavam Meiz Yabmi. The Yavam died, and not say, so I could get married elsewhere. V'loi Meisa Achaisi, nor is she believed to say, Meisa Achaisi, my sister died, and therefore Shaikanas Lebeisa, that I'm allowed to marry my sister's husband. So what's the obvious implication of this Mishnah? That she's not believed to say the Yavam died. Her sister died, but she's not believed. The implication is that the Eid Echad, a singular witness, is yes believed. So says Rav Ashi, says Rav Mordechai, says Rav Acha to Rav Ashi, seemingly we have a raya from our Mishnah. We have a raya from the Mishnah that an Eid Echad does have the believability to allow the Yevama to marry Chutz. Says Rav Ashi back, no, nothing doing. According to what you're telling me, Ema Seifa. Look at the end of that Mishnah. What does it say? A man is not believed to say, my brother died, therefore I could do Yibam to his wife. And nor is a man believed to say, my wife died, that I could believe her sister. And based on your way of learning the Mishnah, the way you, Rav Mordechai and Rav Acha, learned this Mishnah, that it's dafka, the person, the subject, the woman, and now in the seif of the man, and the implication is that an Eid Echad has that level of believability. So what should we be medayik? What should we infer from the seifa? He himself does not have the believability to say that his brother died, to say that his wife died. And therefore, what's going to come out? It would come out that an Eid Echad would be believed to say that this man could go and get married. And now here the Gemara articulates the question, which has been the discussion for the last week or so, that a woman, the specific leniencies and kulas in which we allow an Eid Echad to have a believability. Why? Hopefully by now these concepts are coming clear. That because of iguna, because we don't want a woman to stay tied to a potential husband, so we have a special leniency to allow an Eid Echad to be believed. So the Reisha makes sense that an Echad is believed. With regard to a man, what would the reason be that we would allow an Eid Echad to have believability to allow a man to get remarried? It can't be. So therefore, the way to learn this Mishnah can't be like you, Rav Acha and Rav Mordechai, are learning. Because if we can infer that an Echad has believability in the Reisha, the same that money should be in the Seifa, therefore by a man it would be the same, and we never found such a pretense. By a woman, there's a reason for an Eid Echad to be believed. Why? Misha Miguna, but not by a man. So therefore, explains Rav Ashi, explains the Gemara back, Eloki Yitzrich, L'Rav Akiva Yitzrich. So rather, what must the Reisha be teaching me? The diuk you made is incorrect. The inference that only the woman is not believed, but an Echad is believed, is incorrect. So what must the Reisha be teaching me? The Reisha must be teaching me the following. According to the opinion of Rabbi Kiva, that what? Rabbi Kiva holds that even when there's only a lav, a Yevama lechutz, a Yevama tied to Yibam, and she goes and marries elsewhere, that's an Isser lav. And Rabbi Kiva holds that there is Mamzerus of such an Isser, Ema Chaysha Kalkula, Tizara Vidaika. Maybe according to Rabbi Akiva, she would be Medayik, she would look at it, so maybe even she should have a believability upon herself. Kamash Malon, then no. Sorry, the page was on the wrong side. Kamash Malon, that even according to Rabbi Akiva, nothing doing. Even according to Rabbi Akiva, the Reish is teaching that she is not believed. But not that you could be Medayik, that it is believed. That's not the purpose of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is teaching us a chiddush about she herself. Because according to Rabbi Akiva, that when she marries elsewhere, there's an Isser Lav which would create Mamzeris. So we would think maybe a woman would be Medayik, she would check into things, so maybe she should have a believability. Says the Gemara, no. And therefore concludes part A of today's shir that the raya of Rav Acha and Rav Mordechai is incorrect. We do not have a raya whether an echad has a believability for Yevama to marry outward. Comes along Rava Amar, about 20 lines to the bottom. The first one line is Rava. Says Rava, ein echad neman be Yevama. Ein echad has a believability. Mikal v'chaymer. Says Rava, we tried to bring many rayas from Mishnayos and Brises. Now let's go straight into Kal v'chaymer, some simple logic. Le'isr karis and Eid Echad has a believability to allow a woman to remarry when there's a potential karis, as Rashi points out, that the Eid Echad has believability to say your husband died. Le'isr lav l'kol shekin. So certainly in the case of Yibam, as we just explained, it's a lav for her, the Yevama, to marry elsewhere. So certainly the Eid Echad is believed. If the Eid Echad could allow a married man to remarry, a married woman to remarry, which is of course an Isser Karis, Ishes Ish, certainly it shall allow Yevama to marry Chutz. So Amar Le, Ahumi Rabbanan the Rava says a certain Rabbanan to Rava, no Raya. I'll bring you a raya from she herself that your Kal v'chaymer is incorrect. For she herself has believability to say her husband died. But she does not have believability to say that the Yavam died. Why not? As we've spoken about, at times that she hates the Yavam, and therefore she's not going to be precise with her edus. And therefore says the Gemara, we're concluding without a conclusion, we're concluding with no raya. We have no conclusive raya that an Eid Echad has a believability to allow what? A Yevama who's awaiting Yibam to marry Chutz by saying that the Yavam is no longer. And that is the conclusion of the Gemara. And we continue 10 lines to the bottom of the two dots. The Mishnah concluded and said that this is the drush of Lazim and Masya, that what? That a koyin, he learned about pasuk. That from the pasuk we learned that only one who's divorced from her husband is aser to koyin. But a woman that accepts a get from elsewhere, a man, not her husband, because the halacha she has to accept a get, is not aser to koyin. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Havali Rav Elazar Midrash Be Marganita. Rav Yehuda Marav, he's not arguing in din, he's arguing in drasha. He says, you Rav Elazar, you had a pearl, a marganisa to darshan, and you went, and you grabbed hold of a chaspa, a shard. My marganita, the Tanya learned that a brayse of isha grusha miisha. It says that a woman is a grusha, a woman is divorced from her husband. Even if a woman is only divorced from her husband, she's still pasal likuna. Any level of get pasals likuna. V'hainu reach I get the pasal likuna. That is the reich I get from pasal likuna. So we're just arguing in drasha. Continues the Gemara by quoting a Mishnah on the bottom of Sadidal Amud Aleph. Says the Mishnah, now we're going to flip everything. we're going to flip everything. Until now, what have we been discussing? That a man went Medina Sayyam. And the question was with regard to his wife, when could she remarry? When could she not? What about Yibum? What about etc.? But now the question is, what about in the reverse case? That the woman, the wife, goes on a vacation or overseas. Now, as we continue the sugya, we learn about what happens when the woman goes to Medina Sayyam. Now the Edom come and tell the husband, your husband, your wife died. The din is, man is not allowed to marry his wife's sister as long as his wife is alive. Once he finds out that his wife is dead, he comes back and he goes and he marries his wife's sister. And of course, lo and behold, in the thread of everything we're discussing, what happens? His wife shows up. His wife was never dead. What's the din? Says the Mishnah, Muteres Lachzar. She is allowed to return loy to him, even though he has been living with her sister. She is still allowed to return back to her husband. Why? Because the marriage between her husband and her sister never took effect. Continues the Mishnah, and furthermore, and he, the husband, is allowed to marry the kroivos, the relatives of the second wife, which is whom? The sister. We know that one can't marry one's wife's relatives, but over here, the marriage between this man and his wife's sister was nothing. So he could go back to his wife, and he could even go and marry his relatives of the sister. And those relatives are also mutter the second woman is mutter and his relatives. And if his wife dies, mutter b'shniya, he's still allowed to marry the second woman. So Dinei in the Mishnah is a wife goes overseas, the husband receives testimony, his wife is no longer, he marries his wife's sister. When she returns, the marriage to him and his wife's sister was absolutely nothing. He goes back to his wife, he's allowed to still marry his sister's relatives, her sister's relatives are married to marry him, and even if eventually his wife dies, he's still married, still mutter to the sister. Continues the Mishnah, another din, Amrullah, if they said to him, your wife dies, and he marries the sister, and then they tell him, Kayemes, really your wife was alive, Kayemes Isa, but to Mesa, now she's no longer. And in the interim, he had children from the wife's sister. So Valad Rishon are mamzer. The original children that he has with his sister are mamzerim, for the simple reason that what? For the simple reason that he was never married to her. He had children from his wife's sister while his wife was alive. Those kids are mamzerim. But the latter children which were born after his wife was no longer ein mamzer. Rav Yosi Aimer, he argues to close the Mishnah, whoever disqualifies others disqualifies himself. And the Gemara Mirz Hashem, we'll see further what this means. Says the Gemara, how far does this first din in the Mishnah go? The first din that taught us that when he goes and marries his wife's sister upon hearing that his wife has been nifter, if his wife niftares, if his wife returns, he's allowed to go back to marry his wife. Says the Gemara, says the Gemara, let's play out how far this halacha goes. Even if his wife and his brother-in-law, meaning the sister's husband, goes overseas. Tahani hani nisuin de kamitasra. Ishes gisai agisai. The marriage to the sister, what happens? It asers the brother-in-law's wife, the sister, to his brother-in-law. Afilu achi ishes gisai asira, but ishtai sharyai. Still says the Gemara, the brother-in-law's wife is also to the brother-in-law, but Ishtai, his own wife, is mutter. The Gemara is playing out a case. We have Reuven who's married to Rachel, and then Rachel goes overseas with whom? With her brother-in-law, her wife's brother, with Shimon. And what happens? Reuven hears that Rachel dies, so Reuven goes and marries Leah. Now, when Reuven marries Leah, you know what happens? Leah becomes usher to her husband, Shimon, the brother-in-law. but still Ruvain is mutter to Rachel. That's what the Gemara just said. And Veloya Amrinon, and we do not say the Mitoy Shenesu Ishes Kisa Agisai because Leah became usher to Shimon, because the sister became usher to her husband. Tiaser Ishtay Alav, his own wife, should become usher to him. So the Gemara is just playing out the ramifications of this halacha, that the marriage between Ruvain and the sister is nothing with regard to himself. With regard to his ability to go back to his own wife, it's true with regard to her. She's a married woman, that's Mizana, the sister, and therefore she can't go back to her husband, but Reuven, the original husband, could go back to his wife. Says the Gemara, no, this doesn't necessarily work with everyone. Leima Masnisan to Lake Rabbi Kiva, we just said, seemingly doesn't fit with the opinion of Rabbi Kiva. The Rabbi Kiva, according to Rabbi Kiva, Havala Achais Gerushasai, the wife, Rachel, should be what? The sister of his own divorcee. Because Ruvain, after living with the sister, when his wife comes back home, he has to divorce his sister, even though there was never a marriage. But at some level, as we'll see in a moment, there was a marriage that requires Ruvain to divorce her. So Ruvain should be usher to his own wife, because of Achais Kurushasa, it's the sister of his divorcee. The Tanya, as we learned in a Raisa called Arayis Shabbat Torah in Tzrichan Menu get, all Arayis do not need a get, except for this case, an Ashes Ish that was not this case, a regular case of an Ashes Ish that got married, I'll be Bezdin, or Rav Akiva Moisiv av Ashes Ach. For even the case of Achais Isha's wife's sister, he needs to give her a get. Even though we're saying the whole time now that the marriage between Reuven and his sister is 0. Still says Rabbi Akiva, Reuven is required to give that woman a get. And if he's required to give the sister a get, it should come out by default that Reuven should be usher to his own wife. Says the Gemara from the fact that our Mishnah is saying that Reuven's not usher to his wife is not like the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara finishes off it. The Kiva Domer Rabbi Kiva by a get. Rabbi Kiva says required that he has to give her a get. Why? So says the Gemara that did in our Mishnah seemingly does not work with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Responds the Gemara then, no, we're about 20 lines down. The first one line is Achais. Allah explains the Gemara, you got this dinner Rabbi Akiva wrong? Did we not learn? What is the case in that brisa that taught us that he has to give her a get? The brother married a wife. His brother died. He marries his wife. The Amri Inshi. The reason Rabbi Kiva requires a get, even though the second marriage is nothing, is because people are going to say, and this should sound a little bit familiar, that the first marriage must have had a tenai, and the second marriage was a good marriage. And now as well, in this case, and now we'll speak out the whole case. In this case of Achais Isha, again, Reuven married to Rachel. Rachel goes to Medina Sayyam overseas. Reuven gets up and marries Leah, Achais Isha, the sister of his wife Leah. In this case as well, what's the case? He did kedushin to his wife Rachel, who went overseas. The years that Rachel died. Reuven gets up and marries Rachel's sister Leah. In that case, Rabbi Kiva says you need to give a get to Leah. Why? Because people are going to say there must have been a Tanai in the original Kedushin. Vashabir Nasim, and people are going to think that there's a real marriage between Reuven and Leah. That's why Rabbi Kiva requires a get. However, that's all in a case of Kedushin. Only when there is Erusin. But explains the Gemara, 15 lines from the bottom. The first one line is Ella. Ella Nisuin, Mikala Meimer, Tanai Havle ben Nisuin. Once there's a full-fledged marriage, there can never be a tzad. There's never a thought that there was a Tanai. So in this case, Rabbi Kiva himself would not require a get. The whole kasha of the Gemara was that according to Rabbi Kiva, Reuven has to give Leah a get. If Reuven has to give Leah a get, therefore he should be usher to his own wife Rachel, because Achais Grushasai, the sister of his own divorcee. Explains the Gemara, you got it wrong. Rabbi Kiva only would require a get in a case of Kedushin because of the concern that an onlooker might think that there was a real marriage between Reuven and Leah. But in the case of Nisuin, when Reuven has been married to Rachel for 10 years, Rachel goes overseas, Reuven marries Leah. Rabbi Kiva would never require Reuven to give Leah a get. So says the Gemara, clearly, the Mishnah is not at odds with Rabbi Akiva, and indeed the Gemara continues now and says, I'll prove to you that the Mishnah is dafka even Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva listening if the Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva, why not also teach the case of a mother-in-law? Because Rabbi Akiva holds that the mother-in-law after the death of his own wife is not chayiv sreifa. So from the fact that Mishnah did not say this case, excuse me, I said it incorrectly. The Gemara is now not proving that we fit with Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara is asking a new kasha. You just proved to me it could fit with Rabbi Akiva. Ask the Gemara, no, there's a different din of Rabbi Akiva that doesn't fit with the Mishnah. What's this other din of Rabbi Akiva? We have a new brayso, which Rabbi Akiva would apply the din to our Mishnah to chamaisai, to the mother-in-law, from the fact that the Mishnah did not list the case of mother-in-law, shows us that the Mishnah doesn't work with Rabbi Akiva. Let's explain. Ditanya, 12 lines to the bottom. The first one line is Ditanya. We learned in a Raisha. It says in the Torah, in fire they shall burn him, ve'es hen, and then Isai ve'es achsvin. Rabbi Yishmael learns out what this means he and one of them. Rabbi Akiva, no. Isai ve'es means he and two of them. Now, explains the Gemara. What's the machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael? Just had to read the words in the pasuk. Rabbi Yishmael, there's no question. From the question, we'll understand. Rava explained the machlokes Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva is whether chamasai, the mother-in-law, is included. So the question is, the Mishnah should have thought the case that after Reuven hears that his wife Rachel dies, he goes and he marries Rachel's mother. From the fact the Mishnah did not list that case, that detail itself shows us the Mishnah is not concurring with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Amar le Rav Kana says, nothing doing. Tamiyat akra misreifa misira mimiyat akra. A question I'm sure many people were wondering. It never said that he's allowed to marry the mother-in-law. It just said there's no sreifa, there's no chiyav misa for marrying the mother-in-law. But we do not have a source that teaches us he's allowed to marry the mother-in-law. And that's the reason why the Mishnah did not list that case. So far we have no reason to assume that our Mishnah does not concur with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Says the Gemara, we're going to go a little bit further as it's a little bit early. Says the Gemara, we learned in the Mishnah that after Rachel comes home, Reuven's wife, he's allowed to go back to her. Asks the Gemara why, 3 lines from the bottom, why is Reuven not usher to his own wife Rachel? Because he slept with Rachel's sister. Similar to the Mishnah, the previous Mishnahs that we learned. What were the previous Mishnahs we learned? That the husband goes overseas, and what happens? The wife hears that her husband's dead. She goes and remarries, and then what happens when the husband comes home? She's usher to both of them, everyone's mamzerim, etc. So just like in that case, she's usher and everyone's mamzerim, so too in our case, why don't we say the same thing? Answers the Gemara, loy dami. Ishtoi, when it comes to his own wife to be made a sir deraisa, therefore B'shagi Gazir Ba'Rabban. When it comes to the man, if he would do an Isser deraisa, Isser b'mezid to be Isser deraisa, B'shagi we make a din derabanan. But Achais Isha, when it comes to the man, hearing that his wife died and he went and married his wife's sister, b'mezid lo yasira min deraisa. That even if he went b'mezid and married his wife's sister, it's not an Isser deraisa. As Rashi points out, therefore, B'shagi Glagaz Rabbanan, therefore B'shagi, there is no Issa Rabbanan. And now, tomorrow we'll pick up with the Gemara asking, how do we know that he's not usher to his own wife? We'll pick up from here in the next year.